Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for being here. So happy that you're here. Thank you. That's awesome. My name is James Rondo. I have the great honor of serving as the president and Eloise W. Martin director of our great museum. And again, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here today. Today, we're going to have the privilege of hearing from the artist and the curator behind an extraordinary presentation called Carroll Dunham Drawings 1974 to 2024. As an art museum, we are honored to host this extraordinary presentation, to share it with Chicago, the world, beyond, and today intimately with all of you. So thank you to the artist, Carroll Dunham, who is here, obviously, for sharing this work with us. Again, we're honored and excited that you're here. Thank you. Today's presentation is presented in collaboration, in very proud partnership with our Society for Contemporary Art. We're honored to collaborate with the SCA throughout the year to advance a shared mission that centers our museum as a place for creating a platform for living artists to have a voice in our museum. We are an artist-centered culture, and the SCA goes a long way in advancing that aspect of our mission. So thank you. So with that energy of collaboration and the extraordinary exhibition that we're sharing with you today, I'm pleased to welcome SCA Programming Co-Chair Zach Smith to the podium to say a few words to introduce our program. So again, thank you all for being here. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, SCA. And over to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Zach Smith, the Programming Co-Chair for the Society for Contemporary Art, a nonprofit organization supporting the Art Institute of Chicago's contemporary art initiatives, acquisitions, and collections for more than 85 years. Each year, the SCA presents a series of artist talks at the museum, and each year, the SCA acquires and gifts to the museum a bold and important work of contemporary art. Today, we are so excited to partner with the Art Institute to co-present this artist conversation with Carroll Dunham. Before we begin the program, I will quickly highlight 3 upcoming SCA events. On Wednesday, February 11, Polina Paboja, Chair and Curator of Modern and Contemporary Art at the Art Institute of Chicago, will speak about her curatorial practice here in Fullerton Hall. This program is free and open to the public. On Wednesday, March 4, Carolyn Lazard, an artist whose primary medium is iteration, working across video, sculpture, installation, and performance, will speak here in Fullerton Hall. This program is free and open to the public. Lazard's practice remembers the generative incapacity of debility. Lazard is a Pew Fellow, a Ford Disability Futures Fellow, a United States Artist Fellow, and a MacArthur Fellow. Finally, on Friday, May 1, the SCA will host House Party, our 2026 benefit gala celebrating the place we call home, the Art Institute of Chicago. Black tie, art, music, dinner, and dancing. For more information on the Society for Contemporary Art, including public programs, membership, and member events, please visit our website at scaaic.org or see me after today's program concludes. Now, I invite Carroll Dunham and Thea Liberty Nichols to the stage. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you so much, James. Thank you, Tip. Thanks for being with us today. It's really nice to see such a warm, welcoming crowd of people on a snowy January. Lots of friends, fellow artists, colleagues, visitors. We really appreciate seeing you and for you to join us on the opening of Tip's show today at the museum. Before we start talking about your work, I was thinking about the dialogue that the museum has been having with you, actually, over the past several decades, and it's a conversation that was in many ways begun by Marc Pascal with the prints and drawings that we have in our collection, and then continued by James Rondeau with the paintings that we also happen to have on view right now in 294 in conjunction with your drawing exhibition. And I just want to say what an honor it is to have been welcomed into that dialogue and that generational conversation. And in many ways, our project together has been a kind of conversation, I think, for the past 2 years. We've been working together to select works from your studio archive of drawings. And for the past 2 weeks, we've been together on the install floor, and you've been with us in Chicago. And I guess I just wanted to start there, acknowledging sort of parts of your practice and how we determined to focus on drawing for this presentation, and how that is unique in a way to our show, but that medium is actually, as we've discussed many times over the past few years, foundational to the way you think about what you do in a lot of other media. So do you want to give us your origin story? We'll start there with drawing and how you came to it, and you just take it away. There's a question in there somewhere.
I was born the way most people are born. But I always liked drawing. I wouldn't really even say it was a hobby. I was just a kid who liked to draw, and I kind of kept doing it through my adolescence. And but there was never any notion that I was an artist. I didn't really take that identity for myself on board till I was fairly old, I guess, like in my mid-20s. But I had a tendency to want to be drawing, and I was fortunate in the milieu I entered when I first started being around contemporary art in New York in the early 70s. The older artist I happened to meet or work for, and the discourse that was happening at the time did kind of foreground drawing. I mean, remember sometime in the mid-70s, the Museum of Modern Art made an exhibition, I think it was called Drawing Now, and it was people like Bruce Nauman and Dorothea Rockburn, for whom I had been a studio assistant. I honestly can't remember anymore who all was in it, but it was artists who made drawing as I guess you would say the kind of primary medium of their work. And that really didn't end up, that isn't quite how I would put my relationship to it, but I was encouraged to take drawing really seriously from an early point. And it just became my way, when I started being more serious about my own work, it became my way of thinking about what I was doing and testing out ideas. And, I think my earliest paintings really were sort of colorized drawings in a way. And it's just been a continuous thread.
These are two works in the exhibition, which we hope you've had a chance to see in the Modern Wing in Gallery 289, but if not, please attend after the presentation if you're able, running through June 1st. I guess I want to talk a little bit more about the work that's on view, which is a 50-year kind of survey, if I could call it that, of your drawing practice. And something you just said, where we've talked a lot, and I hope that the work in the space also underlines this, that your project has been a continuous through line for you, your practice of making your own work. But as you enter the show, there's a lot of work that you could put into, characterize as abstract. And by the time you make it through to the end, there's a lot of work that you could describe as figurative. And I think these are two separate ends of the galleries, these two works on screen. But the more that we talked, and the more that I was thinking about your work and writing about it, there's not that distinction in your mind. And one thing that you said that I really loved was that the longer you worked, the more porous the boundary between those two things became. And a lot of the early work in the show, I think, already bears witness to this with kind of passages of body parts, limbs, organs, and then by the time you get to the end of the show, a lot of the nude figures and kind of the classical figures are really composed from this toolbox of formal elements like line, shape, color.
Yeah, that's
Take it away.
all true. I think terms like abstract and figurative are shorthand for very complicated ideas about pictures and visual events. And I was like many younger people, probably more sure of myself when I was in my mid to late 20s than I am now about what my art was or wasn't or should or shouldn't be. And I'm the same generation as a lot of artists that became known for either working in photography or in representational-ish kind of painting. But I was part of a group of friends that I was in dialogue with. We weren't interested in any of that sort of thing. We were really clear that abstract art was where the important things needed to be explored. And I look back now and I think there was a flaw in that. The idea that was an actual territory with clear boundaries is a flawed idea from the very beginning, but it served me well enough just to kind of get going and to find a way to even, when you're a young artist, you have no idea what you're doing, really. I mean, you have to find a space to work in that feels personal enough not to be redundant and also relates to things around you enough not to be incomprehensible. And so for me, that was to tell myself I was making abstract painting and its attendant activities. Over time, it just wasn't a tenable thought to be having anymore, because as Thea said, I started to see things appear in my own work, because I was trying to get away from a kind of systemic, geometric approach to making abstract art. And some of that involved looking back at earlier modernism. Some of it involved trying to let some of the impulses I had that I was keeping at bay, letting them kind of have some agency. And I started to see things in my own work that were obviously either highly evocative of human anatomy or things in nature, or else they were just like so close to literally being that. And because I was like, I kind of liked thinking of myself as a person that was courting, I don't want to say courting disaster, but trying to find the edge of what was okay to do. I started letting these things in, thinking it was a sort of challenge to my own position. And that just it never felt like a break. That's why I always like to say, I never woke up one day and thought, I'm going to illustrate this, or it all came out of the work, and the work showing me things that I had to ponder the implications of and then figure out how it fit into continuing. When you look at these two things together, it seems like this vast gap but I can see an interest in a certain kind of emotional space in that drawing on veneer was made when years ago. And I can also see a preoccupation with formal structure and things, that a kind of programmatic approach to making things in the yellow drawing, which probably doesn't characterize a lot of art that's approached from a sort of figurative position, if I can say that. So, it's been as I've said to you, following the breadcrumbs and just trying to be open to where it goes.
I think, it's interesting in our conversations, and you kind of touched on this, the drawing that you were looking at and were surrounded by as a young artist in New York in the mid to late 70s also functioned as a kind of diagrammatic, your term, matrix or instructional or informational in some capacity, and the grid, which we've never discussed, but I looked for in a lot of early work that is on view, was really interesting and important to me, the way that you introduced that as a plane, and then it became your gateway to thinking about deep space in a composition. I'm kind of digressing. I have these 3 drawings on screen because we have talked a lot about the evolution of your work from drawing to drawing, and what you just ended by saying, how you're following the breadcrumbs and kind of you're following your work. You do work very kind of iteratively and incrementally. You do work in series oftentimes. There's all of that in the show. There's independent works that kind of make their own statement. There's excerpts from series. There's, representations of series of work. Can you speak at all to your process from drawing to drawing? And even with these works in particular, we discussed a little bit literal evolutionary science and how that kind of played in or didn't play into some of the content of work, especially from this period. Couple different questions in there.
Well, it's true. I do tend to, when I make drawings, I tend to make more than one of whatever it is I'm thinking about. I think some of that is some of it is early influences and being exposed to a lot of serial thinking. But I think a lot of it is also just my personality or my tendency to be repetitive, to need to see something over and over again. And a lot of the developmental change that's happened in my work, if I look back on it, is kind of weirdly analogous to how evolution appears to work, where everything kind of goes along same old, and then there's a glitch, a problem, a mutation of some kind that either has survival value or doesn't. And things, and it's. There are a lot of things in my. I don't always use my drawing to be thinking about paintings. Sometimes I just want to make a drawing, or I just feel that something merits that, but it doesn't ask to be taken to this other department. And there are a number of examples of this in our exhibition of things that I got quite involved with as drawing and may have even imagined that they would give way to a painting project of some kind, and they just didn't. I made so many drawings, just looking at these, like different sizes, different colors, different materials of this, basically this blob in the middle of a sheet of paper, which just started out as a drawing of a blob. And then, which I thought had very specific abstract properties, it was something that didn't. Periodically, I just get really sick of all the subject matter, and I try to find a way back to something that doesn't really declare itself as something to be named or to be considered an actual subject. But after I'd made a bunch of these drawings of blobs, I started thinking about them like they're really sort of like planets or moons or celestial bodies of some kind. And I had been working on a different way in these drawings of things that my kids at that time were small. They called them box creatures. These, I was trying to explore this idea of a rectangle with features, a rectangle with personality traits, what that would even mean. And then they kind of they collapsed into the same place, and it was planets inhabited by these characters, and that gave way to a whole thing. So it's, and that's just a specific example of many, many things that have happened like that to me.
This figure, I think, is a good follow-up to that, where you've discussed the character as kind of being Frankenstein together from different body parts. But I originally had placed these in the slideshow because I also wanted to talk about, it's not just that you're iterating, it's that you're taking the same content or subject matter and you're really kind of modeling it in space oftentimes, or you're doing things to the composition that changes the narrative or the sequence of these multiple drawings in a series in a really interesting way that, sometimes makes me think of the work of a sculptor, which you also do make sculpture. You're thinking about a figure in the round oftentimes, or the cropping or the zooming in that you're doing and the frame you're putting around an image is really training your eye to look at the composition in a particular way, not necessarily the subject, because sometimes the subject becomes abstract through that framing, through that zooming in. So I don't know if you want to say more about these drawings, or you want to address kind of how you've tracked sort of the passage of time or narrative or sequence in your work in any way, either through these drawings or others in the show.
Well, these drawings are the nominal subject of them is this character that I sort of cooked up from various things that were happening in my work. And I made a number of groups of paintings in which this was the central structure, and many, many drawings, a lot of different print projects. One of the other, I started working seriously on prints in the mid-'80s, so I'd been doing my work for, about 10 years when I really got hooked on printmaking. And one of the things about printmaking that I really consider just a wonderful and very high form is the portfolio, like the idea that there can be multiple objects that in some sense are all one thing. And in my case, since I'm not really, in my own mind at least, a storyteller, they tend to follow the same sort of notion of variation that my drawings and my paintings do. But so out of working over, and this was probably the period of time when I was the most disconcerted by my own tendency to repeat things and to explore things with a certain kind of like relentless, repetitive thoroughness. And it really felt that probably for a period of 3 or 4 years, I was just making the same thing over and over again. I look back now and that isn't true at all. These drawings are very specific. And I mean, the color, the whole way that the character is thought about, and just, as you say, spatially. And it was the time, I think, when I was starting to think more about the implication of a third dimension in picture space. Up to that time, it was much more for me about layering, either layering of materials or layering of almost the way you would create space in a stage flat kind of way. But it didn't have to do with the idea of rotating things and really starting to imply a sort of perspective. So this was the earliest, probably one of the earliest examples of that. And with certain kind of like stops and starts, it has been a sort of continuous development in my in my work since then. It's hard for me to say how much it has to do with sculpture, because at the time I did these, I really wasn't thinking about that. But it probably contributed to my starting to have fantasies about three-dimensional objects and things.
Do you want to ask me a question about this?
Well, I know what it is, but I guess, why is this here, Thea? Is that the question?
So one of the
This is my bathroom.
that's the answer. That's the short answer.
This is the bathroom in my studio in the house I live in Connecticut.
And one of the joys of working on the project with Tip was visiting him at his home studio over several trips as we were talking about the show and the book and developing the checklist and conversation. And this really struck me the first time I saw it. And I think it's a good kind of continuation of the character in that you don't get that exactly from this picture. These are some drawings in the show, and Tip's, I guess it's a side mirror in the bathroom. And I'll go back, I'm just kind of blowing through it, but this is another view into the bathroom. It's like a pitched roof space. And it might be hard to see on screen, but there's a lot of information in the drawings that Tip placed throughout this room in kind of a 360 directly onto the wall with graphite in this space that directly correspond to the passage of time, right? Because there's the 4 seasons demarcated maybe almost by each wall, not totally. And the imagery from a lot of this space made it its way into other work that you made around this period and had a relationship to your home, the surroundings of your home to a degree. And the figure in this space also became kind of an important next phase of your work that's also represented in the exhibition. And there's a lot of moments like this throughout the show, I think, that really illustrate how you're thinking about the space of the page of a drawing and thinking about, deep space or the outlining of a form or shape. And also, I was really interested in this bathroom space, literally because of a lot of the early work that's also on view in the show that you did with using casein paint and the kind of materiality of that, and our conversations about the Gigantomachy and looking at other kinds of frescoes and wall-based work that was created by carving into a surface or manipulating a vertical surface.
Well, I actually, I don't know if you've ever even really told you about this, but a few of my friends who are here may remember that I lived in a walk-up apartment when I was still living alone in New York. And it had small, like 4 rooms, kind of all off a central room, and I painted the walls of the central room of the apartment with casein paint, kind of weird brownish, reddish, pinkish, creepy kind of color, and made a lot of drawings and all over it. It was actually, at that time I was thinking this is how painting should be. I was figuring things out with drawings, and I was painting on the wall of my apartment. And then I realized, I can't really do that. That's completely impractical. I actually loved it, and I found it very beautiful, but I ended up painting over it because I started working on panels, because I was just kind of trying to be real about what was a practical way to develop my painting ideas. And I hadn't thought about that. I mean, I didn't really document it very well, but it was, there was a lot of interest in wall drawing and in painting on walls. I worked, as I said, I worked in the Rockburn studio, where at that time she was doing a lot of things on walls, interacting with architecture. I had become friendly with Mel Bachner, who was doing wall paintings at that time, and I helped him as his kind of assistant, doing a couple of installations of those things when he had exhibitions. So it was, and that's where I first figured out about casein paint, was Mel was using it. And so it's kind of in my DNA, this idea, and also my first trips to Europe, when I started looking at painting seriously from an historical point of view. The frescoes I saw in Italy made a huge impression on me, the idea that painting and architecture were fused in that way. This bathroom, I really wouldn't call it a project. It's more like what you do with your time when you're lonely at night in the country in the winter kind of thing. But I just started, the walls of the room were this kind of fantastic, weird color, and the house had, a lot of the rooms up on that floor of the house were just in a bit of disrepair, and I thought it would be interesting to just draw on it. I assumed I would paint it all out at some point. So that gave me a kind of whatever attitude about it. It's not an organized thing where I saw it all and planned it out and tried to realize something. It was more like a giant 3-dimensional doodle pad or something. And then I started to move things, like that sculpture is something my son made when he was in high school. The thing on top of the toilet is the same. And I just loved the objects, so I'd put them in there so I could see them when I was, I don't know, going to the bathroom, whatever. Sorry. And it just sort of accrued. And then I realized that it was when people sort of loved it. Like I would get, people would come to visit me. At that time, that was my studio. The only studio I had were these rooms at the top of my house. And everyone was always really interested in the bathroom. So I decided it needed to remain. So I found a linoleum that I thought looked really good with the color of the walls, and put in a nice floor. And otherwise, I just left it all crappy, and that's what it is. The round mirror was velcroed to the wall of the bathroom prior to my occupancy, and I thought it was interesting to just turn it into a sun or a flower or whatever.
You were saving it for us. You knew we were coming.
Maybe.
Okay, so you asked to put this in here in this position. Do you want to just say something about this?
Well, it's a quite recent thing. It's one of a group of 10 things I made that I call them drawing panels because I don't know what else to call them. They're on wooden panels, which, really do reach back to things I was using as supports for paintings a long, long time ago. And I think I had the panels made because I thought I might try to make paintings on them, and then I had an impulse to just start scribbling on them. I mean, this is made with acrylic gesso and markers that are filled with acrylic paint. So technically it's made of paint, but in my map of my own activities, it's very much part of my drawing, territory. And yeah, I thought it was interesting because I have gotten more and more, but my work has there's a lot of orthographic or perspectival representation of spaces in my work now, which, as Thea pointed out, it's kind of just been a progression of that becoming more and more important to me. And these are, it doesn't really matter. It could be anything at all, but in my mind, they're drawings of a deserted art studio. That's what got me to make them, was the idea that out of these pretty reductive elements and this fairly strict vocabulary, that it would be interesting to try to draw empty rooms. And I acknowledge that there is something referential or autobiographical about it, because my studio now where I work the walls are unpainted pine boards, and that's strange because wood has functioned in so many different ways in my work as a surface to work on, as a thing to represent, now as a container for where my work happens. I don't have a real explanation for that. There's a lot of wood in the world, and there's nothing special about my relationship to wood. It just seems to have been a very useful thing, both as a material and as a subject. And I thought it was just interesting to look at this after looking at the bathroom, because it's not a representation of anything literal, but it does kind of feel to me like those photographs of the bathroom a little bit.
I remember when I first saw the series in your studio, you had them all up. And as you said, your studio is wood-paneled studio, and you at the time had a room framed out, but it wasn't drywalled yet. So there was sort of that framework structure. And I think for me,
it was never actually, but it was never meant to be drywalled. It's a partition made of 2x4 studs, which is really just a way to do something with the space of the room.
Mm-hmm.
So just,
not just that this was a wood panel, but the way that the knots are kind of identified in this really did remind me of your wood veneer works, of which we have some excellent examples in the exhibition, and also wood grain as a kind of pattern that you respond to oftentimes in your work, or you alter, or you camouflage, or you augment, was really interesting for me to see again in this series. So I'm glad that you wanted to include this. Do you want to say anything about what's in the foreground, or you want to?
Well, the things in the foreground, I think Thea means those little boxy things with the spirals on the corners. Those have taken on a kind. They have sort of, as it were, metastasized into drawings, which became me fantasizing about sculptures, which became me actually trying to make sculptures, which very definitely derived originally from those things. The other thing that's interesting for me, that's very important in terms of my procedures, is that when I have these 10 panels and I want to make 10 things that are closely related but different enough. And I started every single one with that black rectangle, which is the furthest from a spatial point of view. If you're thinking about how to construct the space that's there, it's the furthest back thing. And it's this kind of just a black slab that the entire rest of it is constructed around. And why there has to be a black void at the back of the empty studio, it all sounds quite creepy when I hear myself describe it. I haven't really, honestly, haven't given that a lot of thought. But it's there. It's a fact of making them. Trying to get more out of rectangles.
Well, I mean, you're talking a little bit about drawings that relate to sculpture, that come into being thanks to the drawings. I mean, I know you think of the media that you work in as distinct and separate from each other, and that's actually how your studio is laid out too, where you have a place where you go to paint, and a drawing studio with flat files, and then a sculpture laboratory. And I think this is a nice place to land. These are the 3 of the 4 paintings that are on view in the Modern Wing in 294. And their related drawings are in the exhibition. And I just wanted to hear you talk a little bit more about the texture of this drawing archive. These are drawings that you've made, again, over the past 50 plus years. We ended in 2024. It's not like the archive has stopped growing. It's material that you've retained for numerous reasons. And the work in the show, I think, also reflects a certain, varying scale, varying media, really interesting, varied paper type or support surfaces, and also different techniques and finishes. And so I don't know that you really consider these studies for a painting, but I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about the relationship of some of your drawing and the drawings in the archive to work you make in other media, or how you kind of work through a drawing until you feel like that drawing is finished and it's the drawing in and of itself.
Well, I mean, there are different states that one can call finished, depending upon the. I'm not quite sure what. I mean, I've made, many drawings that probably in literal time took 7 minutes, like just really just some lines on a sheet of paper, and other drawings that are very worked over and detailed, whatever. I was just, the reason if I seem a little distracted, I was trying to remember actually if these drawings preceded those green paintings or if they followed the green paintings.
Let's look at the dates. We should talk about the dates.
No, we could figure it out if we really wanted to get on our hands and knees and try to read these numbers, but it's not really, it doesn't really matter. I mean,
the drawings look slightly earlier.
Yeah, so there was a point when I did start to use, before this work, when I did start to use drawing a lot to figure out things about my paintings. And that is probably when I started making a lot more really small drawings. Like I would take 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper and tear them in quarters. And so I would have stacks of these things. And I was just trying to understand relationships within a rectangle. And a lot of them are just lines. And I got a lot out of that. And those drawings were finished when the rectangle looked, I don't know, full, balanced, whatever. Then there were other drawings where I really felt I was making drawings. And this archive that we keep referring to, which I don't even know when it started getting called an archive, because it's really just all the stuff I have. But there are things that are in these flat, it's just a bunch of flat files, and they're drawers labeled by years, and some drawers have a whole lot of drawings in them, and some drawers don't have that many, and it's just the truth about whatever I have been up to. But things end up in there for all kinds of reasons, and all different kinds of drawings end up there. So these drawings that you were showing are interesting for me to see now, because if they preceded the paintings, they're obviously something to do with me trying to understand how this would work. I knew I wanted to make 3 paintings of naked guys trying to kill each other with clubs. And I didn't exactly know how I would construct that, and there had to be, as I said, a kind of repetitiveness to it, but enough structural difference for them to really get into some sort of informational exchange with each other. So I made drawings like this. There were a bunch of other drawings of this subject, which either I no longer have or we didn't include. But it's funny, actually, because to try to reconstruct, as I say, in a general sense, I know that I've used drawings for all kinds of purposes, and I actually have when I'm faced with the drawings, I have a pretty good, I can reconstruct what studio I was using, and quite a bit about what my life was like at the time. But I don't always remember the exact function that I thought the drawings were performing.
Do you want to say anything about the dates as a sign-off, since we just mentioned it?
The dates on the work?
Mm-hmm. And your dating system as it evolved over time?
Well, I can tell you it was not 25-year-old me imagining that in 50 years there would be a curator who would find her job made vastly easier by...
That's what I was going to say.
by the fact that I had... I don't really know. I mean, I say it's like, depending on what frame you're using, you could either say it's serious and thorough, or it's obsessive compulsive disorder. I mean, it's kind of both. Like, I always wanted to know the order in which things happened. And I imagined that if I didn't get hit by a truck or kill myself or something, that I might be doing this for a long time. I kind of liked that about I knew there were older artists who were doing things that were still very, vital. And I thought that was one of the things about art that attracted me. And I think I always wanted to be able to reconstruct the path I was taking. So I started dating things. And for a long time, I just threw things in folders. I didn't have flat files. I didn't have anything like that. It was just, I moved my studio. I've had many studios over the years. And when I was younger, when I moved, it was like all these files in the back of the car, and then, folders, and then put them somewhere, and then they'd move again. It wasn't really until my wife and I got settled where we live now that I started really getting serious about flat files and organization.
We were talking a little bit about the dates yesterday because they're almost a kind of signature. You always have them on the recto, and they're very honest. If you have one date, but then you come back to the drawing, you cross that date out and you say the finish date, the execute date. And they also kind of tell you how to orient the work, which I find really interesting. But now that we're talking, it almost seems like it's a punch card of your drawing over time. I think they've allowed us to put brackets around the work that's in the show, and really, 50-year period is an immense amount of work to look across. But as we've discussed many times, this is one perspective on that, because this could have been any number of stories we told. Hopefully,
well, I had to struggle with that in the beginning when Thea first started coming to do her research, and I knew how much material there was, but I don't think Thea really did. And I had to realize, like, this I'm not the person who I shouldn't be imposing myself on this. First, it just wouldn't be workable, and it would also not necessarily be there's no true version, I have over 4,000 drawings in these flat files, so there's no true version of it. Any number of people could have chosen a different way to fill that room upstairs. So I thought I would learn more, being curated, as it were, and giving up a certain amount of control. So that's been super interesting. And I'm more than comfortable with the story that's being told up there. Even though I know that, I told Thea, I woke up the other morning, I was having, stress. And I thought, this is a big mistake. There should be like 300 drawings up there. This is not adequate. And then my wife, Lori, and then other people kind of talked me down from that. Like, nobody wants to look at 300 drawings. This is, because I've made exhibitions with 300 drawings in them. And I learned a lot from doing it. But I have also learned negative things from doing it, which have to do with how much attention you can actually expect people to give to things, and also how much there's a way that by trying to force 300 drawings on the proverbial viewer, that the individual drawings aren't really being honored in the way that I would like them to be. So, this is a better solution.
I'm really happy for the context of the show in that gallery in the modern wing as well, and its relationship to your painting installation. And I think that's a good note to end on. You want to say any last words?
Just thank you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming.